Lauro mentioned, in our department, we are going to host the food studies minor, right? And it offers courses in anthropology, biology, environmental science, geography, history, marketing, Spanish. And it really wouldn't be much of an exaggeration to say that a food studies minor can complement really any major offered at Mary Wash. It's by nature an interdisciplinary field, which is what makes it so interesting. And it provides insights, therefore, into a lot of things you guys just mentioned, right? Into the relationships between food and then all aspects of human experience. So the change took place when food was no longer limited to sort of nutrition or the culinary arts, right? It became accepted as it was originally not seen as a serious topic, and eventually it became accepted academically as an interdisciplinary lens for understanding politics, identity, environment, globalization. So if we go back to some of those departments that I just mentioned at UMW, just to give us a little bit of a better idea of what food studies courses look like, we could say that, for example, an anthropologist might study how food rituals create meaning, express identity, and reinforce cultural traditions. A biologist might examine how food affects human health and how plants and animals are cultivated for food production. A geographer might study how policies, environments, and spatial inequalities shape access to food across different places and communities. An economist might examine street vendors to explore entrepreneurship, labor practices, and local market dynamics. An environmental scientist might study how climate, natural resources, and land use, affect the sustainability of food systems. I also believe that food studies are especially well suited to our course this summer because they operate on a shared foundation. Everyone eats. A food is something every person shares, regardless of culture, language, or background. As such, it's an ideal space for students and members of the Fredericksburg community and UNW community at large to engage directly with one another, sharing stories, recipes, traditions, and personal experiences. Food study courses also offer a uniquely accessible entry point while allowing for substantial intellectual depth. As we've already acknowledged, everyone eats, but not everyone has been given the tools to critically examine how food systems shape their lives. This course will introduce concepts from political economy, colonialism, and environmental studies in order to provide a framework through which everyday experiences can better be understood and discussed. Our hope is that the course will become a dynamic exchange between theory and practice. In addition to engaging with food on an academic level, all participants will learn from each other's lived experiences and from the expertise of our guest speakers in fields ranging from immigration, cooking, restaurant work, and food insecurity advocacy. Through these conversations, we aim to foster a deeper appreciation for the diversity that exists within our campus and local community, while also recognizing the common humanity that food brings to the table. So let's start with a simple question. What did you eat yesterday? Right? So that's an easy one to answer, right? But think not just about what you ate, but where it came from, who prepared it, taught you to eat it, and what memories or emotions you associate with it. Most of us think of food as a biological necessity. We eat because we need energy to survive. But food is much more than fuel. Food tells stories, it communicates identity, it reflects history, power, migration, religion, economics, and environmental change. The course begins with a simple premise then. To understand food is to understand people. Every meal connects us to larger social worlds. A bowl of rice, a cup of coffee, a loaf of bread, or a family recipe can reveal several centuries of human interactions and historical change. Over the next 5 weeks, we'll explore food not merely as something people consume, not just what we eat, but as a powerful lens through which we can understand culture, society, politics, and the future of our planet. And this is why food studies have become so popular on college campuses. Food is one of the few things every human being needs and shares. And yet, despite this universality, food practices vary enormously. Different cultures eat different foods. Different religions prohibit certain foods. Different societies organize meals in different ways. Different economic systems determine who has access to food and who does not. Food, therefore, sits at the intersection of culture, identity, religion, politics, economics, environment, history, and scholars increasingly recognize food as a serious subject of study because food allows us to ask some of humanity's most important questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? How do power and inequality shape everyday life? How are communities formed and maintained? What kind of future do we want? So, throughout this course, we will see that food is never just food. And to begin, I'd like to give a brief overview of themes we'll cover each week. Oops, I forgot to do that slide. um, Week one is titled Food and Identity. The famous maxim, tell me what you eat, and I'll tell you who you are, comes from the foundational 1825 gastronomy book, The Physiology of Taste, by the French political figure and epicure, Jean-Anselme Brillat-Savarin. A well-known cheese is named after him, so I'm not quite sure what that tells us about him, but I digress. When people describe themselves, food often appears surprisingly quickly. People identify with terms that they also use to refer to national cuisines. I'm Italian, I'm Mexican, I'm Indian, I'm Lebanese. But food identities also emerge through family traditions, religious practices, class backgrounds, and regional cultures. Many of us have foods that immediately remind us of home. Think about a holiday meal, a grandmother's recipe, a dish prepared only on special occasions. These foods are rarely important because of the ingredients alone. They matter because they carry meaning. Traditional food is an integral part of cultural identity. The food itself and the associated preparation techniques and social customs serve as a reminder of the past and provide a connection to historic and cultural roots. Food is considered a part of intangible cultural heritage, a way of life that is passed down from generation to generation. Traditional recipes, cooking techniques, and dining etiquette can reflect the values and beliefs of different communities that are all vital parts of cultural heritage. Many are familiar with UNESCO's World Heritage Sites, over 1,200 globally recognized cultural or natural landmarks which are deemed to have outstanding universal value. But UNESCO also maintains an intangible cultural heritage list, which includes many dishes and food-related customs throughout the world, including a festive banquet in Jordan, al-Mansaf, harissa from Tunisia, traditional tea processing techniques and social practices in China, the culture of Ukrainian borscht cooking, Pavlov culture and tradition in Uzbekistan, Arabic coffee, a symbol of generosity in Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and the UAE. UNESCO's website says, quote, intangible cultural heritage includes the practices, knowledge, and expressions that communities recognize as part of their cultural identity, along with associated objects and spaces. Transmitted through generations, this heritage adapts over time, reinforcing identity and respect for cultural diversity, end quote. Anthropologists often describe food as a language. Just as language communicates ideas, food communicates belonging. Sharing food creates social bonds. Refusing food can create social distance. Offering food can express hospitality, friendship, respect, or love. This raises a key question. How do food practices help create individual and collective identities? In week two, we'll move on to colonialism, global trade, and empire. We move from personal identity to global history. Many foods we think of as traditional to a particular national cuisine are actually products of centuries of international exchange. Let's take tomatoes as an example. Today, they seem essential to Italian cuisine, yet tomatoes originated in the Americas. Or consider chili peppers. Many people associate them with Indian, Thai, or Korean cuisine, yet they too originated in the Americas. What about Spanish empanadas, Indian samosas, Polish pierogi, Jamaican patties, Chinese dumplings, Italian ravioli, Cornish pasties, Turkish burek, etc.? They're all variations on the same fundamental culinary idea. Put a filling inside a portable starch wrapper and cook it. A dough wrapper solves lots of problems at once. It makes food portable, it preserves moisture during cooking, it stretches expensive ingredients, usually a meat, it allows the use of leftovers, it creates a complete meal in one package, and it protects food from contamination while traveling. For farmers, soldiers, traders, shepherds, and laborers, it's close to an ideal technology. But still, how did civilizations, separated by thousands of miles, all end up wrapping fillings in dough? How did these foods travel across the world? The different traditions met each other through exploration, trade, migration, conquest, and empire. European colonial expansion transformed global food systems and created the specific and distinct dishes we recognize today. Empires moved crops, animals, technologies, and people across continents. This process reshaped diets everywhere. Sugar, coffee, tea, chocolate, tobacco, potatoes, and maize all became global commodities. But these exchanges came at an enormous human cost. Plantation economies often relied on enslaved labor. Colonial governments reorganized agricultural systems to serve imperial interests. Local food systems were frequently disrupted or even destroyed. As we study colonialism and empire, we'll ask ourselves, who benefited from global trade? Who paid the price? How did food become connected to systems of power and equality that continue today? These questions also lead us naturally into week 3. Foods travel because people travel. Migration is one of the most important forces shaping cuisines. Whenever communities move, they carry food memories with them. Immigrants often recreate familiar dishes using available ingredients. Over time, foods adapt. New cuisines emerge. Think about pizza in the US, Chinese food in Great Britain, Indian food in South Africa, Mexican food in California. These are not simply copies of the original cuisines. They're examples of cultural creativity and adaptation. Diaspora communities use food to maintain connections with their ancestral homelands. At the same time, food becomes a site of innovation and exchange. Globalization accelerates these processes. Today, ingredients from around the world can appear in one single meal. A breakfast may include coffee from Latin America, bananas from Ecuador, oats from Canada, and yogurt produced locally. Food demonstrates how interconnected our world has become. Yet globalization also raises questions. What happened to local traditions? Does global food culture create diversity or uniformity? And can communities preserve culinary heritage as an increasingly interconnected in an increasingly interconnected world? For week 4, we'll to feasts, fasts, rituals, and famines. Across cultures, important moments are often marked by eating together. Food is deeply connected both to abundance and to scarcity. Throughout history, societies have organized life around cycles of celebration and restriction. Feasts mark moments of joy, gratitude, and community. Many cultures celebrate harvests, religious holidays, weddings, and national events with large communal meals. At the same time, fasting practices appear in many religious traditions. Fasting can represent discipline, reflection, sacrifice, purification, or spiritual devotion. Food therefore serves both material and symbolic purposes. Yet there's another side to food history: famine. Throughout history, millions have suffered from food shortages caused by drought, disease, conflict, economic policies, and political decisions. Famines reveal that hunger is often not simply a natural disaster. It's frequently connected to social and political structures. Studying food means confronting both the celebration and the suffering. It means examining why some populations experience abundance and consume more than necessary, while others face food insecurity. Our final theme focuses on the future and ways to address these issues. Today, global food systems face unprecedented challenges. Climate change affects crop production. Biodiversity loss threatens agricultural resilience. Population growth increases the demand for food, and food waste remains widespread. These challenges force us to ask, how can we produce food sustainably? How can food systems become more equitable? What role should technology play? Can traditional knowledge contribute to future solutions? And the future of food is not only an environmental issue, it's also a cultural, political, and ethical issue. The decisions societies make today will shape what future generations eat and how they live. And as I mentioned at the beginning, public lectures will not always address what the students read for homework, but today, since it's our first public lecture, I think it's important that to do so just to sort of set a little bit of groundwork in terms of terminology and theories, and also because the students read three chapters from one of the most influential works in contemporary food studies, The Ethnic Restaurateur by Christianendu Ray. The book is particularly consequential because it shifts our attention away from really what we know, what we're most familiar with in terms of food, right? From celebrity chefs, from food critics, and from consumers, and focuses instead on immigrant restaurateurs, cooks, and workers, the labor behind the restaurant experience. So Ray opens with a paradox. Throughout urban history, immigrants have dominated many food occupations. Bakers, butchers, cooks, waiters, restaurant owners, and food vendors have been disproportionately foreign born. Yet when scholars discuss taste and food culture, immigrants are frequently eliminated from the story. When the general population thinks about food, we think about eating. We think about Michelin star restaurants, famous chefs, food blogs, television shows. And the scholarly literature, too, tends to focus on consumers, critics, food writers, cultural trends. But in both these cases, the immigrant restaurateur becomes invisible. Ray argues that this invisibility is not accidental. It reflects broader tendencies in society to celebrate consumption while overlooking labor. In other words, we admire the meal, but we ignore the cook. He asks a simple but powerful question: who actually produces the food culture that we celebrate? When people discuss restaurants, the conversation typically focuses on quality, flavor, atmosphere, culinary creativity. Reviews also discuss ingredients, preparation techniques, dining experiences. Critics, both trained and untrained, evaluate elegance and sophistication. In other words, they discuss taste. What often disappears is that labor making those tastes possible. Every restaurant meal is a product of extensive work. Someone purchased the ingredients, someone transported them, someone cleaned them, someone prepared them, someone cooked them, someone served them, and someone washed dishes afterwards. This labor is physically demanding, time-consuming, and frequently underpaid. Ray argues that modern food culture systematically celebrates taste while consuming labor, which he refers to as toil. The concealment is not accidental. It reflects broader social hierarchies. Historically, societies have valued intellectual and artistic and, aesthetic activities more highly than manual labor. The culinary world reproduces this distinction. Certain individuals are celebrated as creative geniuses, celebrity chefs, restaurant critics, culinary innovators, while the workers who sustain the food systems remain largely anonymous. Ray wants us to see food differently. He contends that scholars of food, culture, and taste have spent far too much time studying consumers and not enough time studying the producers, especially immigrant food producers. Ray's central innovation is to shift attention from the people who eat ethnic food to the people who make it, sell it, and popularize it. The shift seems simple, but it fundamentally changes how we have historically thought about taste, culture, and immigration. One of Ray's targets is the dominant sociological tradition associated with Pierre Bourdieu and his ideas on taste theory. Bourdieu's most influential work, Distinction, A Social Critique of the Judgment of Taste, transformed how sociologists think about food. For Bourdieu, Food is a system of distinction through which social classes reproduce inequality and communicate status. His argument was provocative. Taste is not simply a personal preference. Instead, taste reflects social position and is linked to social class. People develop preferences that reflect and reproduce their positions within social hierarchies. Bourdieu largely examines consumers. He and many others primarily ask questions like, why do Americans eat sushi? Why did Indian food become so popular? Why do consumers seek authenticity? Ray appreciates these insights, but believes that something important is missing and reframes the question to ask them this way: who cooked the food? Who opened the restaurants? Who took the risks? Who introduces new foods? Who persuades people to eat unfamiliar foods? Who shaped the palate of the city? Ray argues that the immigrant restaurateurs play an active role in creating taste rather than merely responding to it. Taste is not simply inherited by consumers, it's negotiated among producers, consumers, critics, and institutions. The ethnic restaurateur examines how immigrants create restaurants, build businesses, preserve cultural traditions, and contribute to urban economies. For Ray, the immigrant restaurant is not merely a business. It's a site of cultural preservation, a vehicle for economic mobility, a space of identity formation. Restaurants become places where migration stories are lived and expressed. At the same time, these individuals face inequalities related to race, ethnicity, class, and cultural status. Imagine two chefs. The first works in a prestigious French restaurant. The second is an immigrant chef specializing in traditional South Asian cuisine. Both possess extraordinary skill. Which chef is more likely to be recognized as an expert? Historically, many societies have privileged the first chef. Elite chefs are often described as artists, innovators, experts, while immigrant chefs are often described as not even chefs, but rather as cooks, first off, and then as authentic, traditional, and cultural representatives. Notice the difference. One group is associated with creativity and skill, and the other is associated only with cultural reproduction. Ray argues that this distinction is unfair. It's socially constructed rather than natural. And to add insult to injury, this preconceived hierarchy further affects menu prices, restaurant locations, critical reviews, investor interest, customer expectations, and culinary education. Immigrant chefs possess professional expertise, but their skills are often interpreted through the lens of ethnicity alone, rather than culinary excellence. The result is that two restaurants may demonstrate comparable skill, creativity, and labor, and yet receive very different recognition and economic rewards. Ray calls for a greater recognition of immigrant restaurateurs, asserting the immigrant restaurateurs are not merely providers of ethnic food. They're cultural producers, entrepreneurs, and agents of social change who have transformed the American culinary landscape. Okay, so you are now armed with some basic food studies theories, particularly those linking food to culture and identity. And as we've just discussed, our course will cover a wide range of topic because it's the nature of food studies. So where then is a logical place to start today? By means of an introduction to the class, we'll explore two of the most widespread and socially significant food practices in the world, street food and communal eating. Both are among the most ordinary of human experiences, and thus they align well with our goals today. They require no prior knowledge and are immediately accessible, unlike specialized topics, say, like agricultural policy or molecular gastronomy. But although they may seem like simple everyday activities, both reveal important aspects of culture, identity, economics, social relationships, and urban life. In fact, the two topics together provide a broad overview to nearly every major theme we'll encounter throughout the course and demonstrate that ultimate point that food, you're going to say it after me as a mantra by the end, right? Food is never just food. So let's start with street food. Street food presents food as public, economic, and political activity, right? A street food stall includes entrepreneurship, labor, migration, urban space, and public culture. On the other hand, communal eating presents food as a social and cultural practice. A shared meal reinforces family, friendship, ritual, identity, and community. In other words, food is a window into larger social processes. Specifically, street food and communal eating speak to the most important basic premise of food studies. Food is not simply about what people eat, but rather about how societies are organized through food. They also reveal how food operates in both private and public spheres. Communal eating often occurs in homes, at religious gatherings, celebrations, and family events, while street food occurs outside in markets, streets, public squares, and transit hubs. Understanding how food links personal experiences to larger social structures is one of the central concerns of food studies. Buying a hot dog from a cart, sharing a potluck meal with friends, eating food at a market, joining a family barbecue, or participating in a religious feast are things that all of you have experienced, and they all seem like simple acts. Yet these practices reveal fundamental aspects of human society: identity, inequality, globalization, migration, economics, public health, and social connection. Street food and communal eating, in other words, can show us how seemingly mundane food practices illuminate major social and cultural processes. By the end of the lecture, you should be able to answer these three questions. Why is street food important beyond providing inexpensive meals? What social functions does communal eating serve? And how do these practices shape communities and cultural identities? Now let's go back and modify the question with which we began today. Not what did you eat yesterday, but was the last time you ate with other people? Was it a family meal, a festival, a cafeteria lunch, a meal shared with friends? Most of us rarely eat in complete isolation. Food is often a social activity. In his book, The Raw and the Cooked, anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss has famously argued that food is more than a practical activity. Cooking transforms nature into culture. Food carries meanings, values, and social relationships. So we'll take a potato as an example. Growing in the ground, the potato is nature. But once you harvest and cook it, it becomes culture. No one prepares the potato the same. Humans who never simply consume nature directly, they transform it through social knowledge, technology, and tradition. For Levi-Strauss, every meal demonstrates humans' ability to reshape the natural world into meaningful cultural forms. So if Bourdieu asked, what do food practices tell us about power, inequality, and social class? Levi-Strauss instead asks, what do food practices tell us about how humans think and organize the world? For Levi-Strauss, food is a system of symbols that helps humans transform nature into culture and organize the world. Let's think of a couple everyday examples and compare them. Eating a sandwich alone at your desk, sharing a lunch with family, buying a panini from a street vendor. The nutritional content of those meals may be the same, but the social significance differs dramatically. Sociologist Georg Simmel has argued that meals are unique because they combine individual biological needs with collective social experiences. Everyone must eat, but societies create rules about when, where, with whom, and how eating occurs. Let's begin with street food. Street food generally refers to ready-to-eat food sold in public spaces by vendors operating from carts, stalls, trucks, markets, or other temporary structures. Street food exists in nearly every society across the globe. It's one of humanity's oldest forms of food service, long before modern restaurants existed, vendors sold food in public spaces. Examples include tacos in Mexico City, pad thai in Thailand, satay in Jakarta, falafel in Cairo, hot dogs in New York City, crêpes in Paris. According to research by the Food and Agricultural Organization, billions of people worldwide consume food regularly, making it one of humanity's most widespread food systems. Most food historians focus on famous chefs or elite dining. Street food shifts our attention towards vendors, workers, migrants, small entrepreneurs, everyday consumers. This aligns with a major goal of food studies, understanding how ordinary people create food cultures. For immigrants and low-income entrepreneurs, street vending may be one of the most accessible forms of business ownership. Street food creates an interesting challenge, though, for Bourdieu's theory. Historically, many street foods were associated with working class populations because they were cheap, accessible, and filling. Think of hot dogs, tacos, kebabs, noodles. But with globalization, street food has been transformed into a prestigious culinary experience. Today, wealthy consumers, foodies, may seek out a quote unquote authentic experience, and they often look to street food. So, food once associated with necessity becomes associated with cultural sophistication, clearly demonstrating how meanings can change across social contexts. And perhaps it's not a hard sell to believe that vendors are providing consumers a high-end gourmet experience, despite the unadorned, banal setting. In addition to fostering cultural preservation and belonging, cultural foods and traditional food customs can also promote good nutrition and health. After all, traditional dishes are passed down from generation to generation, and family recipes are cherished and kept secret. Traditional foods, therefore, are often made with fresh, locally sourced ingredients and prepared using traditional cooking methods that have been passed down for generations. As a result, they tend to be healthier and more nutrient dense than processed or fast foods. Traditional diets are also typically rich in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, healthy fats, which can help lower the risk of chronic diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. For obvious reasons, street food often tells migration stories. Many iconic foods originated through the movement of people. Examples include tacos, influenced by indigenous and colonial histories, kebabs adopted by Turkish immigrants in Europe, curry dishes transformed through imperial and migration networks, and food trucks introducing immigrant cuisines to new populations. Anthropologists describe this as mobile culture. Recipes travel, ingredients travel, people travel. Food becomes a record of these movements. Just like the dough-wrapped meat examples we spoke about at the beginning of this lecture, when someone orders Korean tacos or sushi burritos, they're consuming products of globalization and cultural exchange. People will frequently ask whether foods are authentic, and street food is often considered more authentic than restaurant food, which may be curated for a specific audience. But academically, authenticity is controversial. Food scholars note that cuisines have always changed. For example, tomatoes originated in the Americas, potatoes spread globally after colonization, and chili peppers transformed Asian cuisines despite originating elsewhere. Many foods considered traditional are actually products of centuries of change. Thus, authenticity is often less about historical accuracy and more about cultural meaning. Street foods often reveal how cultures constantly adapt rather than remaining fixed. Sociologists describe such spaces as sites of everyday multiculturalism, where diverse groups encounter one another through routine activities. At a busy market stall, students, office workers, tourists, and laborers may eat side by side. Seating may be shared, customers stand together, prices are generally lower, interactions are more informal. Urban theorist Jane Jacobs even argues that vibrant cities depend upon active sidewalks and public interactions. Street vendors there create gathering places, informal social encounters, neighborhood identities, and pedestrian activity. Street form transforms the public space. A city square with food vendors often feels safer and more lively than an empty plaza because people linger, observe, and interact. Unlike formal restaurants, street food often reduces social distance. Unsurprisingly, this raises important public health questions. Historically, authorities often viewed street vendors as sources of disease, congestion, disorder. But scholars increasingly recognize that street food can also provide affordable nutrition, employment, and food access. The challenge then is one of balancing safety regulation, economic opportunity, and cultural preservation. Ultimately, street food is more than inexpensive food sold in public spaces. It offers insight into culture, migration, labor, urban life, inequality, authenticity, and the politics of who has the right to produce and sell food in the city. Similarly, communal eating is not just about food consumption. It's a social practice that reveals how people negotiate identity, power, culture, labor, community, and belonging. Whether people gather around a street food stall or at a dining room table, eating is fundamentally a social act, and thus communal eating is key to understanding food and its social implications. Communal eating refers to situations where food is prepared, served, or consumed collectively. Food scholars use the term commensality, derived from the Latin commensa, sharing of a table or with table, to describe the social practice of eating together. And they use that term to study how social relationships are created and maintained through shared meals. Anthropologists as well have long noted that sharing food appears in virtually every known human society. Why? These events are not simply opportunities to consume calories. As sociologist Claude Fischler explains, eating together helps produce social identity. Communal meals are opportunities to create and to reinforce social relationships. One could argue that communities are not only groups of people who live together, they're also groups of people who eat together. Although the details differ dramatically, communal meals occur across cultures, religions, and historical periods. Examples can include family dinners, religious feasts, neighborhood barbecues, school cafeterias, and military mess halls, holiday meals, wedding banquets, potlucks, shared restaurant dishes. Communal eating helps to create and reinforce social bond, just as Fischler said. When people share a meal, they often share much more than food. In fact, research consistently finds that eating together increases conversation, values, traditions, obligations, trust, cooperation, social cohesion, and emotional connection. In a sense, meals help create society itself. Evolutionary scholars even suggest that communal meals helped early humans coordinate group life. Sharing food signaled mutual support, reciprocity, and group membership. The act of eating simultaneously creates a sense of belonging. Okay, what about today, you might ask? Well, let's think about meeting friends for coffee. The primary goal is likely not really to consume caffeine. Instead, the beverage creates a socially acceptable context for interaction. Food often functions as social infrastructure. So let's begin by examining the social functions of communal meals. Sharing food creates trust and solidarity. It builds social bonds. Consider what happens when someone invites you to dinner. The invitation signals hospitality. Let's think of the very first Thanksgiving. Accepting that invitation signals a willingness to participate in a relationship. And many cultures view eating together as a powerful expression of friendship or alliance. Political negotiations and job interviews often include meals. Business deals are negotiated over lunch. Families resolve conflicts around the dinner table. Food creates opportunities for social connection. Two, creating identity. Communal meals teach people who they are. Children learn family traditions through repeated meals. Religious communities use food to reinforce collective identities. National cuisines often become symbols of belonging. Think about holiday meals, whether it's Thanksgiving in the US, the Lunar New Year celebrations in East Asia, Eid feasts, Passover seders, Christmas dinners. Foods help define what membership in a group feels like. They also evoke memories. People often remember the communal meals for decades because they connect food to memory and identity. For immigrants, street food can also recreate cultural familiarity in unfamiliar places. A food stall may be a symbolic connection to homeland and identity. Psychologists have documented how taste and smell trigger autobiographical memories. A particular food may remind someone of their childhood, family, migration, or just home. And you're going to have to indulge me a bit because I'd be remiss at this point when discussing memory not to mention one of the most significant passages of all of French literature, which is Proust's so-called Madeleine scene, where he links food and involuntary memory about his hometown and childhood in Cambrai. I'm going to read you a much truncated version of it. I raised my lips I raised to my lips a spoonful of tea in which I soaked a morsel of cake. No sooner had the warm liquid and the crumbs with it touched my palate than a shudder ran through my whole body, and I stopped, intent upon the extraordinary changes that were taking place. Whence could it have come to me, this all-powerful joy? And suddenly the memory returns. The taste was that of a little crumb of Madeleine, which on Sunday mornings at Cambrai my Aunt Leonie used to give me, dipping it first in her own cup of real or of lime flower tea. And once I had recognized the taste of the crumb of Madeleine soaked in her decoction of lime flowers, the whole of Cambrai and all of its surroundings, taking their proper shapes, growing solid, sprang into being, towns and gardens alike, all from my cup of tea. Finally, communal meals will mark important events. Beyond the everyday, food is central to celebrations and rituals. Births, marriages, graduations, funerals, and religious observances frequently include communal eating. In these contexts, food helps transform ordinary moments into meaningful events. A wedding banquet is not merely dinner, it's a public affirmation of social relationships. A funeral meal is not merely nourishment, it's a collective act of mourning and support. Etiquette and rules are also taught at the table. Meals are classrooms. Practices vary across cultures, but all communicate important social meetings and can provide answers to questions like who serves first, who eats first, who sits where, who cooks, who cleans up, what foods are appropriate, what conversations are appropriate. At the table, we learn manners, etiquette, gender expectations, age hierarchies, and cultural norms. Sociologists often point out that meals teach individuals how society as a whole works. These questions reveal structures and cultural values. Communal eating can create belonging, but it can also create boundaries. Historically, meals have often reflected social inequities. Communal meals can unite people, but they can also exclude. Societies have used food practices to establish boundaries involving class, race, religion, gender, and ethnicity. Examples include segregated dining spaces, elite banquets inaccessible to common people, gendered expectations surrounding cooking and serving, religious restrictions regarding who may eat together, and religious dietary restrictions as a whole. Anthropologist Mary Douglas argued that food classifications help societies define order and belonging. Food is therefore both a bridge, according to Fischler, but also a boundary, according to Douglas. Throughout history, sharing food has sometimes been used to define insiders versus outsiders. Even today, food choices can signal social class, political identity, or cultural affiliation. This means that meals are never neutral. A table can be a place of inclusion and a site of power. Today, many scholars ask whether communal eating is changing in today's modern world. Several developments have altered eating patterns: urbanization, longer work hours, globalization, food delivery services, streaming entertainment, and smartphones. Increasing numbers of meals are eaten alone, and in some countries, single-person households are growing rapidly. At the same time, new forms of communal eating are emerging. People share food experiences through social media. Friends organize pop-up dinners. Online communities exchange recipes and cooking videos. Food festivals attract thousands of participants. So rather than asking whether communal eating is disappearing, we might ask, how is communal eating being transformed? In conclusion, street food and communal eating appear ordinary because they're woven into our everyday life. Yet they reveal some of the most important dynamics in human society. Street food shows us how food operates in public life through labor, markets, migration, and urban culture. It provides affordable meals, creates economic opportunities, preserves cultural traditions, and shapes urban life. Communal eating shows us how food creates identities. It builds social bonds, reinforces cultural identity, creates community, and transmits traditions. Together, street food and communal eating demonstrate that food is one of the primary ways societies organize themselves. Going back to the ethnic restaurateur reading, we can also note that they both raise questions about power and inequality. Street food raises questions such as who has access to capital, who works in informal economies, why are some foods considered prestigious and others ordinary? Communal eating raises questions like who is included in the meal, who is excluded, who prepares the food, and who receives recognition for that labor. If we reframe these questions in terms of Bourdieu and Lévi-Strauss, we can see that buying street food, choosing a restaurant, discussing authenticity, or sharing a communal meal means you're participating in two processes at once. One, creating and interpreting cultural meanings according to Lévi-Strauss, and two, expressing social identities and hierarchies, Bourdieu. So next time you buy food from a street vendor, share appetizers with friends, or attend a community meal, remember that you're participating in practices that scholars regard as central to understanding how societies function. As we conclude today's lecture, I want to return to the question with which we began. What did you eat yesterday? Perhaps that meal seemed ordinary, but after today's discussion, we can see that every meal is part of a much larger story. As you now know, food is not merely something we consume. It's one of the primary ways humans create our social worlds, relationships, communities, and cultures. Food connects us to family and to identity. Food reflects histories of trade and empire. Food travels through migration and globalization. Food shapes rituals, celebrations, and religious practices. Food reveals inequality and injustice. Food will play a central role in addressing environmental changes in the future. A meal is simultaneously biological, cultural, political, economic, and emotional. That insight captures the central idea of food studies. Over the next 5 weeks, we'll explore these connections together. And by the end of the course, I hope that you will never look at a meal quite the same way again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very great overview. As a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box you find most probably on the bottom of your Zoom window. Some might have them on the web. Oh, you can't see us? Oh, how is that possible?
We can see us.
You should be able to see Dr. Di Lauro and me, not the other participants. Okay, that is something.
Okay. Right. Scott says he can see us. So yeah, you should see just the two of us.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the two of us here. So
Because it's
it's,
set
as
up
I
as a
said,
webinar.
it's a webinar setup. So that's how it is that the participants don't see each other. But if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, as I said, on the bottom of your thing to the right side, next to more. So and share. There we have one.
Can you see them? I cannot see
So
them.
yeah, so readings, can you list the other readings students are assigned? Well, we can list the books for sure. We cannot really list in the public the copies that get made for the students. That would be against copyright law. But we can list the pages of the books. Those are usually quite easily available in libraries, and you could do those readings this way. But unfortunately, yeah, copyright does not really allow us to put them out there publicly for everyone to read. So, okay. I have one question, and
Mhm.
you know already about that. That is that is the term ethnic food, ethnic restaurant, ethnic restaurateur. I have a little bit of a problem with that because I think it kind of draws a line between us and them.
Mhm.
That there is food that is uh, ethnic, and then there is food that is what, non-ethnic? I mean, is McDonald's and Panera are those non-ethnic foods in comparison to like an Italian restaurant? I like that immigrant food or immigrant restaurateur much better. So I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Yeah, I agree that the term ethnic restaurateur can be problematic, right? Because it often treats some cuisines and restaurant owners, or many of them, not even just some, as other, while implying that there is some default mainstream or dominant culture restaurants, right? So it makes certain people appear as outsiders. Ethnic, as we saw today, that was also kind of vague, right? So many things changed over time. So what even is, if we tie it into that question of authenticity, right? It doesn't make much sense either, right? Because how do we determine what's ethnic and what's not? But I think immigrant is much more accurate, and particularly if we going back to those default cultures, right? So what is obviously McDonald's, and I don't,
Mhm.
Lord knows what else is not ethnic, right? But what is it then? Like, what is the other group, the default group? I don't know that they necessarily have anything that binds them together as a group either, which is problematic.
Mhm. Okay. During the first part of Dr. Di Lauro's lecture, who is this fellow or woman in food history named in my phonetics Fisher? Fish.
Uh,
Okay.
it the in the Fischler is the one who says that social relationships are created through food, basically. So it's
Hmm.
Claude, like his Claude. He thinks that eating together, so he really focuses on that shared meal, uh, produces social
Hmm.
identity, right? They're used to create relationships and reinforce relationships. I think reinforcing seems somewhat self-evident, but the idea that it's actually creating something too is sort of was his novel approach.
Hmm. Okay. And then there is a question: would it be that most food is ethnic to the West, but especially to America?
I'm sorry, repeat. I was just typing in
Would it be
Fisher.
that most food is ethnic to the West, but especially to America?
I think
Is it more
I
of an
think it's sort of,
East-West?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I think our default approach is that food is ethnic, and that's more, I think we perceive it that way more than other places do as
Hmm.
well.
Okay.
Which is somewhat ironic since I don't know. I think we'd be hard pressed to define American cuisine. I mean, maybe certain items, right? Apple pie is your traditional,
Hmm.
um, but it would be difficult to almost everything is ethnic if because it when you travel abroad, there are very few American restaurants because what does that mean exactly?
Hmm.
Sometimes they have brunch places or diners, sort of something that's it's cultural, but not necessarily based on the food itself.
Hmm. I mean, take burgers, I mean,
Hmm.
McDonald's and Burger King,
That's the
I
one.
mean,
Yeah.
it's hamburger, it's from Hamburg. So
Yeah. Right. It's
that's
not, it's
something
not
that is
American.
so American. So somebody says everything is in America, is in America, is not American at this point. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, it's not American is the point. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? So regarding, I have one more remark. Those that are local here in Fredericksburg might know that we have like two German restaurants. I'm from Germany, so I dare to have an opinion on that, what you are cooking. And I have to say, and that's not necessarily a criticism, it's just an observation that their food is also the food of Germany of the 1960s and 70s. That's when, especially for the Alpine chef, which was the Bavarian restaurant, that's where when the parents of the chefs immigrated to the United States. So to a certain extent, it's also fossilization. And on the other hand, the guests, I think, in my observations, are often retired military that were in that time in Germany and remember food like that. So, I mean, it works out. Everyone likes what you cook, but German cooking has moved on since then. I mean, there is much more, use of healthy foods. They cook with olive oil. They are kind of taking a look at Italy, in many things. There's also vegetarian options much more than there used to be. So, just as an observation that kind of authenticity can also be some sort of a time capsule of a certain period, that when people came to an immigrated to another country.
And I see there's a question about authenticity too in the chat. I
Yeah.
think, how do you determine real food versus authentic food? And I think maybe if we take the examples in the chat being Olive Garden or Chinese American food, right? I think rather than simply dismissing, let's say, the Olive Garden, right, as non-authentic Italian food, you could
Hmm.
sort of frame it as the Olive Garden serves is an Amer Italian American restaurant that emphasizes American taste and dining expectations
Hmm.
in Italian cuisine or something like that, right? So it's not that it's completely should be dismissed entirely, but I think reframed a bit so that it's not presented as authentic. I don't know if that answers the question exactly.
Hmm. Yeah. There's one more question. I appreciate the comments on authenticity of food.
That's what I was, yeah,
Oh, sorry, that's what,
that's what I
yeah,
was
okay.
reacting to, yeah.
You saw that. Okay, good. Cultural advisor. So that's actually something I asked Danilo Orofino to talk about too when he's coming on, and I think in week 4. What are foods that are very authentic Italian that he thinks he could not serve Americans here? And are there foods, on the contrary, are there foods that are kind of Americanized, that he kind of adjusted for the American palate that he might not be able to pass off as Italian food in Italy? So are there kind of modifications that are taking place, or are there certain taboos that he thinks? So I asked him about talking about that, and I hope he will talk about that.
I think a good example of that too is a video that we had the students watch. I could probably put that in the chat, but
Hmm.
and it references the eating of horse in Europe
Hmm.
and I've had that sort of the student reaction on study abroad trips where someone realizes like they finally figure out what the word means and they're horrified. Usually it's an avid writer, but
Hmm.
that's something that would not that is served in Spain and Italy